Hello and welcome to the very first episode of I Turn My Podcast On. So much exciting things are happening that I'm coming to you in a little post-production recording here before we start the episode. So it's Tuesday night, and I'm finishing all the editing for this episode for the first album, Telephono, that's going to drop Wednesday. But since I posted that first teaser episode, a lot of things have happened that I wanted to announce. So, first of all, I was able to coordinate some interviews with Britt Daniel, songwriter, lead singer, guitars player of Spoon, and just kind of happened naturally where I had sent him some questions about Telephono era stuff because it's kind of hard to find online, and I wanted to be well researched, and then I just had some weird kind of random questions, maybe some things that he had never talked about. So he offered to talk with me. And so we already have an hour and a half of interview conversation recorded, and we have only got through the first two albums. So we have a lot more conversations coming, and we're coordinating them as we speak. So very exciting, really cool. I know that the fans are going to be interested because we get really in-depth about some fun topics and kind of taking it slow, and just talking album by album, release by release. So some new insights, some things I've never heard about. And so hopefully that keeps it interesting for all of us. So here's what you can expect going forward with the episodes. When we do a album review episode, at the end is going to be the segment where Britt and I talk about that specific album. So, 45 minutes to an hour of me breaking down the songs, what I like about them, what I don't like about them in some cases, we'll see. And then talking general things about the album. And then we will cut to that specific conversation on that record. Because again, we have so much content, and there's some things that don't necessarily fit into that specific album, just things that we talked about. So at the end, when we get through all the album episodes, I'm going to release in the segments in each session that we record the full conversation, because there's things that just aren't relative to an album, but are really cool, really neat stuff. So got to save some things. As anybody who's trying to create interesting episodic content, I can't give that all to you now. You guys are going to have to stick around, keep listening, and I trust you guys. You'll do it, because we're Spoon fans. We're here for each other. So that's how the album episodes are going to work. And then this is where you guys come in, because after I release an album episode, you write in. We're going to talk, and I'm going to just kind of curate your guys' responses. You can talk about my opinions on the album, your very own opinions on the album that have nothing to do with mine, and we can also talk about the interview segment that Britt and I do if you have reactions to that. So those episodes, I'm going to be relying on you guys. I can tell you right now, I've already had lots of really great responses, so I will apologize on every episode and say, I'm sorry if I haven't got to your comment or response. We're going to kind of see how it goes. And we're going to see the window of release to when I record a fan episode. So right now, I think the first one will give 2 weeks. And if we just get tons of responses in the beginning, we get this thing rolling in rhythm, then it might be just a 1 week time period, and then I go record the fan episode. So that's subject to change, something that we're going to look at as we move along here. But again, I thank all the early support from fans and, of course, Britt and other fun people involved with Spoon, which I've got to chat with a little bit. So yeah, the future looks bright. We're going to go through the album episodes. We're going to have fan episodes. We're going to have the car radio episodes. COVID-19 pending. We'll see how we can work on those with this changing circumstances. I know I can at least do my family, so that I live with. So that could be interesting. Can record a album with a 5-year-old and see what they think. And then again, as new content comes up, let's say Spoon releases a new album or new songs, we will be sure to be there to talk about it with you guys and hopefully maybe with members of the band again. Would be really fun. So I am proud to present to you the very first episode, album number 1, Telephono. Well, hello. Thanks for stopping. My name is Tyler, and I'd like to personally welcome you to the very first official episode of I Turn My Podcast On. The one, the only podcast dedicated to the greatest rock band of our time, Spoon. It is a career-spanning, super-fanning event. We are here to talk about the very first studio album by Spoon called Telephono. It's going to be an exciting, interesting episode because people have opinions on this album. People in the band have opinions on this album. There are fans that heard about Spoon through this album, obviously a very small number compared to their reach today. But there are fans that love this early stuff, and then they kind of are not as interested in the new stuff, and vice versa. They hear about Spoon later in their career, and they think the old stuff is just not great. I am in the middle camp where I really appreciate it all. It's different. It definitely has... Or you could say it sounds like a different band. Let's start there. It really does. When you play a song off this record, Telephono, and you play a song off of Ga 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 Ga, They Want My Soul, Hot Thoughts, it does not sound like the same band. Besides Britt's voice. So it's different. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of it. And then we're going to go track by track. I do want to mention that they did have a release called the Nefarious EP that I'm not going to go track by track because basically what it is, there's 3 songs on Telephono. They're inferior recordings. And then there is a cover by the Godfathers, which is fine. But it's neat that it's their first recordings, and I'm sure the band was really excited about it when they did it, to have an actual physical piece of music, a 7-inch record that they recorded. But again, the songs were redone and in a better way and better fidelity for sure. It's non-disputable. So that's really the only release that we're going to kind of just not listen through and talk about. But you can check it out. There's bootlegs of it. That's a 7-inch I still don't own in my collection, so I do want to get it when I find it for a reasonable price. But yeah, go back. We'll talk about that maybe on another show when we go into just the bootleg recordings, or because there's no digital official recordings. This is just somebody's vinyl rip of the songs. So we might get to that someday. But again, we are here to talk about Telephono, the record that was released on Matador Records. And just to go through some interesting facts about it. First of all, for years, I thought that was Britt Daniel, lead singer, songwriter of Spoon, on the cover. But it's actually not. It's a chap from the Teen Titans, Austin, Texas band. They actually put out some releases through Peekaboo Records, which Spoon put out one release on, which we will talk about in a future episode. But it's not Britt. It is Philip with some weird Dracula teeth and sunglasses that Britt usually wore on stage. and Britt actually took that photo. So that's kind of an interesting little fact about the album. Also, Telephono came from the fact that Britt was on the phone a lot, and I always thought it was just kind of like a play on the Spanish word for it, but it actually combined a phonograph and telephone. So it's just some weird made-up word. So the official release date of this album was April 23rd, 1996. And again, that was released on Matador Records. And co-owner of Matador actually discovered Spoon at a anti-South by Southwest show that they were playing at the Blue Flamingo. And he couldn't get into the Johnny Cash show at South by Southwest, so he took a walk. He made a note that he liked them, and that definitely played into their relationship with Matador at the time. They recorded the album, and it was produced by a man named John Crosland. They recorded the album in his garage. I've also seen it called a tool shed. So someday we talk to him, we can find out the exact contents of this building. There's conflicting facts, whether it was a tool shed or a garage. I would love to know. Could a car fit in there, etc. But basically, it was just recording their songs that they were already playing live. They just wanted to kind of have a record of the songs, which makes sense. So it was recorded in Austin, Texas, where the band was from, based out of to this day. And it was on a budget, according to Wikipedia, of $3,000. Personnel on this record, we have Britt Daniel on guitar, vocals, and songwriter. Jim Eno on the drums. And then we have a woman named Andy McGuire on bass and backing vocals. And her presence is felt on this record. A female presence. And you will hear her vocals come up in actually most of my favorite songs from this record, which we'll get into. But the songs that I really dig, she has vocals on, and it definitely gives it that Pixies vibe, and that was something that they were definitely compared to, and people wrote them off as a Pixies rip-off band to an extent, but I highly disagree, and I like a lot of the music on this album, and I will showcase the specific parts that I like when we get to it. Another interesting fact about just the band Spoon, how they came up with their name. So they had a show booked on Friday night, and Thursday night they got together and tried to think of a name. Now the band name comes from a can song, Spoon, and I imagine they just kind of went through some names. They were trying to think of something quickly, and I think Jim Eno's favorite song was I'm So Green, and so he was like, maybe we could be Green Boys, or like Gang Green Beans, or something, but Britt was like, no, it's a one name, band name, that's all the rage. That's what we need to do. Just Spoon. So that's what happened. Obviously, those events were somewhat dramatized, and the names were not changed, though, for that reenactment. So, this record, again, we mentioned in the beginning that the opinions are varied, and so I'm very excited to hear what you guys, the fans, the listeners, have to say about it. Again, I'm encouraging you all to write in. I will have links in the show notes. But the email, I'll say it at the end too, but it's iturnmypodcaston@gmail.com. And so what I want to do is, after releasing a episode, have enough time for you folks to listen and then write in. And then we'll talk about the listener responses on the next episode. So, let's get into Telephono. Are you ready? Let's do it. Okay? So this first track, we're going to listen to the opener, Don't Buy the Realistic. Now, I love this song. I think it's a great intro, and this should have been a single. This should have been a single. Now, the album opens up with some weird noises, sound effects, and then around the 25-second mark, you'll hear the drums kind of fade in. For the single, they could have just taken that out. I'm not saying that's the reason this album didn't sell hundreds of thousands of copies because of the singles, but I do find the two singles from this album to be weird and or interesting, and I guess just me personally, I wouldn't have picked them, but I love this song. I really do. I remember the first show when I saw them in 2009, I was yelling for it. I was in the front row, and Britt was looking at me and a couple other fans, kind of trying to hear the songs we were asking for nicely. And I didn't know at this time that they didn't play these older songs. So I was yelling, "Don't buy the realistic!" And by that time they had completely abandoned all these songs. But I just remember really liking this album because it was the third album that I heard. So I heard Gimme Fiction, Ga 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 Ga, and then Telephono, and that was it for many years, and then I bought all the records later. So, if you haven't noticed by now, tangents will be gone on. I think a couple minutes ago I said we're going to start listening. So, let's get the record going. I'm going to get past that introduction, the noise, and then we're going to hear the snippet of the song. All night, be left alone. Take my name as my own. So come on and take my hand. Oh, come on and take my hand. Oh, come on and. All right, so again, we skipped that longer introduction, and then we got a verse into the beginning of a chorus. And I really like the, more quieter verse into that loud, abrasive chorus. And you'll notice Andy McGuire's vocals more so in your left speaker or left headphone. And it's great. It just adds some texture. She's not in there on the one line of the chorus, but she will be later on the take my part. So let's get to that part. There's a part towards the intro where the vocals are a little bit not on the exact same phrasing, and I really like that part. So we're going to play that. That's a portion that's towards the outro right here. Now that's rock and roll. That's great. That's good stuff. I love that song. I love the intro. I love the backing vocals by Andy, and the chords are real basic, kind of in that F and G pocket, but it's great. And you can really hear, as you'll hear, especially on the first records, Britt's guitar playing. He usually has an underlying riff with the chords, and Jim's drumming is great on every record. And I bet they just had a lot of fun recording this highly energized album. Another thing that I really like that you might not notice upon first listening is the transition between Don't Buy the Realistic and Not Turning Off. So it takes the beat and changes it, but it used those same chords. So it goes from G to B flat to F to C. I'm saying it in my head, sorry. And then he takes that and just goes from G to B flat. And it works really nicely as a transition. So we're going to play, again, that part, and then some other clips of Not Turning Off. And before we do that, though, just to highlight that Not Turning Off was a single, and I have conflicting feelings about that. I think it works really well as a track 2. It does have a neat little vocal hook that we will talk about here, but I feel like there are some other hooks and things on this album that stuck with me more. So that's just a personal preference. And I could see some other songs on here being a single as well. But again, we're going to start with that transition of Don't Buy the Realistic into Not Turning Off right here.
Take my
All right, so that is just a cool way to jump moods, but also kind of feel natural. I love that. So the vocal hook, or the little part I was referring to in Not Turning Off, we'll get to that portion now, and then we will talk about it after the clip.
It's just a machine, oh honey, please, it's just a machine, oh honey, oh please, it's just a machine, oh honey, oh please, it's just a machine. There's something about you're up late, you can't taste like...
Okay, so that is a pretty iconic part. The oh honey, oh please, it's just a machine. I don't know what that means, but it sounds cool. And his voice sounds cool. he hits that like high yelping register, and that comes back on other songs as well. But I do like that song. I really like the beat. I like Jim's drumming in that as well. Like, again, I'll probably say that on a lot of songs. And I like the weird noise. Instead of a guitar solo in the middle section, it's a just weird sound effects, and then a piano comes in towards the end as well. So that's something that you'll notice on all Spoon songs, pretty much to a extent, is some weird sound effects or sound collages throughout their music, and that's something to me that really makes their music interesting and wants you to, or makes you want to keep re-listening. So my theory, and if I ever get a chance to ask him, is that Britt's work in sound effects, he did sound design for video games, and I feel like that's really been a big part of their music. When you think about how those type of things are mixed, where you have music right with sound effects and you have to make sure things are panned correctly and levels are done correctly, it's really meticulous, especially in those days of like software design and in the 90s, and those days, the 90s. And so yeah, I feel like that's been a big part of their music, and why you have shakers, tambourines, all these little things doing parts, and especially when you listen to it on headphones, and a lot of that has to do with the space that they use with their instruments, and it just makes it for really interesting listens and re-listens. And oh yeah, all the songs have super catchy melodies and great vocals. But yeah, so we're going to get into All the Negatives Have Been Destroyed, which is track 3, which was also a single. And now might be a good time to say that these two singles have a total of 3 B-sides. So Not Turning Off had a B-side of Prince's Party Up. They did a cover, which is interesting. And then All the Negatives Have Been Destroyed has a cover by friend of the band John Clayton, the song called Irrigation Man, which is really good. I really like that. I know they played that live quite a bit in their early days. And then they have a song called If You Say So. And that one, for some reason, I'll just have that randomly stuck in my head. I have that like bass intro and the drums. Do, 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 do. So we'll play snippets of those songs at the end just to kind of wrap up the whole album, talk about the B-sides, because those do have fairly good recordings. I'm not sure. I believe they were on CDs. I have the 7 inches, but I'm assuming that Matador also put the CD singles out for at least All the Negatives Have Been Destroyed. But so you can listen to the best like digital versions that you can find. So let's get into All the Negatives Have Been Destroyed. So we'll play a little clip and we'll talk about it.
From the start of it, you could let me go if you wanted to, but I haven't seen that you wanted to, so I took it all around and took it back and it said myself that if you want, you can never leave it. If you want, you can let it go. And all the negatives have been destroyed.
All right, so that's that clip. And that's just kind of an example of a verse into a chorus. And then it has a little musical breakdown, which is fine. It's nothing super exciting. But I did want to highlight earlier in this song, there's like a sound effect. Before it gets to the guitar breakdown, there's like a little... you'll hear it in your right headphone. So just an example of the weird sound effects that they're adding to the songs. But then I do love the outro where it just has some oohs and it kind of tapers off. And I think that's a cool way to end that highly energetic song. So let's listen to the outro of All the Negatives Have Been Destroyed. A song about photography. So that is the ending of All the Negatives Have Been Destroyed. And again, I like that ending as it kind of slows the album down for a great song. One of my favorites, probably second favorite if we have to get that nerdy with the ranking. Maybe third favorite, but yeah, I love it. It's slow. It's the first time on this record that we start to move a little bit more slow motion. But I really like that. It's called Cervantes. What an introduction for the song. Cervantes. I don't know what that means. The mixture of consonants and vowels with that seems like a made-up word, or it talks about Carolina. So, is Carolina a person? Because it's talking about she. So, what if it's somebody named Carolina Vantes? Or what if it's not that at all? Who knows? But this is a great song, and this is really where I feel some of the Tex-Mex vibes, the influence. For some reason, I don't know, it's almost like the percussion and the chords. It reminds me of a Texas bar. And this, to me, is really the first time in Britt's songwriting that evokes, like, mystery. Again, like I was saying, is this Cervantes a person? It sounds like a name. What does it mean? So you just think about that stuff while you listen to it. And we're going to do that right now.
Carolina's cheap, or she's on down, goes around on a carpet all night. But to me, well, she's nowhere now. She'll be nowhere tomorrow morning when you slashed all up. Cervantes, Cervantes.
All right, so that is that clip of Cervantes, and again, when I listen to that song, I feel I'm in this place. I close my eyes, I see the moonlight shining on a dirt path in the middle of the Texas desert to a bar where the band is playing this song. And a merry time is had by all. And so actually this is one of my picks for a single off this record. I would have thought this would make a cool single. Another thing I want to highlight about this song though is the drums. Some really cool drum work going on here. And since we're talking drums, that means it's time for a little segment that I turn my podcast on that we like to call the Jim Eno Appreciation Minute. Jim Eno Appreciation Minute. Hello and welcome to the Jim Eno Appreciation Minute, where we always appreciate Jim Eno, but it always lasts longer than a minute. I'm your host, Tyler, and we're going to talk about Jim Eno playing the drums. I hope that doesn't shock you because this is the Jim Eno Appreciation Minute. Specifically, I want to get into his drumming on Cervantes today. Now, first listen, multiple listens, something you might not notice, but there's something really interesting that he does as the song starts to build. He does a bit of a shuffle on the snare, and then it gets really aggressive, and then as it comes down into the chorus, he plays it differently, and he hits the kick drum 3 times. Boom, boom, boom. And something about that, just how he changes it up, really makes the song, or this portion of the song, really stand out. So that's what we're all about on the Jim Eno Appreciation Minute. We're here to say, we see you, Jim. We love you, Jim. And keep it up. Now let's get to that clip I was talking about where the drumming is just magnificent. And the song ends just how it begins, that slow trot off into the moonlight. Thank you again, Jim, for all that you do. Jim Eno Appreciation Minute. So now moving on to track 5, which is Nefarious, and again, they had an EP they released with this song on it, the title track, if you will. I do really like this one because, again, you feel the presence of Andy, and I think the female vocals just complement it really nice, especially on this song. So we'll get to a portion here.
What's good? What's not so good? Sometimes it's hard for her to tell. And what's good? What's not so good? Sometimes it's hard. When she knows you so well, and when she knows you so well, and now your teeth are red, and there's a little bit about you I don't wanna know. Now your teeth are all red.
I started with that little clip as a lead-in because you'll notice in your left headphone, there's that little shaker. So just something interesting they did in the middle of the song. Instead of having the hi-hat keep the rhythm, they use a shaker on that verse. And that's something that they do all the time. And maybe you don't notice it on first listen. And so it's just things like that that keep you coming back. And also at the end, he does the little high yelping registery voice. I want to say, well, I definitely know there was Drake Tungsten recordings which is his solo project pre and during Early Spoon, that has that in it. But maybe we'll try to make a note of like the last time he does that, if we remember. You guys remind me, okay? Next, we have Claw's Tracking, which is one of my least favorites, unfortunately. I don't know, I guess I just feel like the melody is not super strong on this one, and it just feels really samey. But there is a cool little middle breakdown point that I like. So I'll play a little bit of the song, and we'll play that breakdown section in the middle of the song.
I have this disc in your hand. Once above, out of the boat that hit the ground, there was hardly any.
Yeah, so that's that song. And it's fine. Just not a super memorable one for me. Interesting low on that bridge, or that breakdown portion that we played towards the beginning. It seems like a jumping off point for a Mountain to Sound. That rhythm that he's playing, it's obviously slower on Mountain to Sound. But that is a song that's coming up next on the next episode. So I wondered if that was something that they thought about or used. Now we get to my all-time favorite on the record, and that is Dismember. I'm telling you, I've probably listened to this song hundreds of times, and it's really short, so it hasn't taken up that much of my life. But this, I can definitely see the Pixies vibe coming through. Like, kind of reminds me of Debaser, similar word. The word is used throughout the song with the female backing vocals. But I don't care about any of that. I love this song. It has a verse that you feel like, okay, I know what's going to happen next. And then the chorus just feels so different, so melodically different and really heavy, and then it goes back into the... So of course that is something that the Pixies have done and so many other bands have done. I don't feel like they were ripping off any riffs or like anything musically that's like, oh, this sounds exactly like them. It sounds inspired by them. And so many bands have done that. And so to me, that's not a criticism that makes this album any lesser than, say, any other bands during that era. Maybe later on in their career, we'll see their influences are they're pulling from a lot of a variety. Their influences are really being felt from all over the board, and maybe on this album, they were really sticking into that genre, which the variety is lacking a bit. So that's something you could say as a negative, but to many people, that's a positive. They like what they like. They like this style of music and nothing else. And really, who cares, right? Let people enjoy what they want. You and I are going to enjoy this song together, though, right now.
If she had half a mind, well, she might not take this all quite so seriously. So put the notebook down and take off your dress. I've never seen it before. And I said,
alright, so we'll fade it there just to talk a little bit. Love the beginning, that upstroke. I don't know what it is about it. It just feels really good. Starting that chord progression. So there's 2 verses. And then on the second verse is when the background female vocals come in that I love so much. And then there's the chorus. So we'll split it up and talk about the sections here. And here's some of those background vocals.
That's what you are, Rebecca. That's what you do to me, sugar. Come on, let's go outside there while we go sit at your car and get cut down. Cut on. Cut down. When I was at your show, oh man, I could.
So good. Again, I don't know what the song really means. I mean, dismember, cut down, cut off. Those are in the lyrics. But I believe it says, come on, why don't we go sit out in your car and get cut down, cut off? I don't know how that would be a conversation. I don't get it. I don't know who this old man is and why Britt was at his show. But he was mesmerizing because he couldn't take his eyes off of him. But everything about it, like I said, I really like. On the second verse of Dismember, you'll notice Andy double tracks the female vocals, and she's actually singing Dismember two different ways, slightly different, but enough to pop out in the mix, and I love it.
When I was at your show, oh man, I couldn't watch you at all. Oh man, I couldn't take my eyes off you. I'm trapped down.
Hilariously enough, my wife and children do not enjoy these Spoon songs. They love Spoon. But I was just listening to this in preparation for this episode, and my son was playing this in the car. As soon as that chorus, he's like, Dad, I'm going to have nightmares now. That the Spoon Man's going to come out of my closet and say, cut off! He didn't have nightmares. He was totally fine that night. And all nights since. But, yeah, it is a weird juxtaposition of a song to have those two parts together. And that's what makes it cool. So now we are on to side 2 of the record. This would be starting out the second side. It's a song called Idiot Driver, and I really do like this one. This was lent to the Peekaboo Records out of Austin. They did a compilation, and it's a slightly different version. I think it's called like Bacon Sandwich Mix. And what they do is once the chorus comes in for Idiot Driver, like that drops the guitars and there's just this little t-t-t-t. So it's slightly different, but nothing too crazy. You can look that one up if you want to hear that alternate version, but we're just covering the album version today. And so we'll hear a good portion of that. Again, I feel like it's just a good kickoff to the second side. It's a fairly short song, but it keeps the album flowing.
Every time the time's pushed over, all the punks are thick on the ground. Right in the black rain, you're thinking it over. Turning your tanker, turn it around. Eddie Driver, Eddie Drive. She swears I don't know her. Why don't you turn over?
So that is Idiot Driver. You get a couple Spoon things in that song. First, you get that weird sound effect. And then I love the bass effect. It's like a bit of a drive to it. But I really like that. And then you'll also get a hand clap in the middle just for variety's sake. Again, short, fun little song. Not much bad or good to say about it in the best way possible. Again, I love it. It's just those little tidbits about, you'll kind of hear the soundscapes there I really like. Again, I don't know what the song is about. Is he seeing a really bad driver and then making up this story and how bad of a guy he is and how he can't believe he's with this amazing woman and how she could be with some idiot driver. Like, he literally wakes up in the morning and drives to work like an idiot. When he's done, he drives home like an idiot. And she just welcomes him home and says, honey, how was your day? She doesn't even think of how bad of a driver he is. I don't know. And then the next song we have is Towner, which is, according to Britt, a John Clayton written song. And I'm not too big on this one either. I'm going to play a portion of it, of course, and we'll talk a little bit about it after, but it's just one that's not super memorable to me. It's a bit repetitive and doesn't jump out. But we'll start it at the little bridge portion that's got the weird sound part, and we'll go from there. Okay, so that's Towner. Like I said, it's just has some repetitive bits to me. It's the second to longest song on the record, 3 minutes, 6 seconds, and the instrumental breakdown is a little interesting, but I don't think anyone would say this is their favorite Spoon song. And hey, if I just made you scream at your radio or listening device because this is your favorite Spoon song, please write in, and I would love to talk about it. But yeah, it's got some interesting musical things going on in it, but does it feel good when it felt good? Just kind of over and over, and the music repeats itself. But next, we're getting into the last songs on the album. We're to Wanted to Be Your. And I always kind of fluctuate on this song. Sometimes I really like it. Sometimes I'm like, it's just kind of annoying. It's really straightforward. I don't think you really have to question what the lyrics are about. Britt wants to be your friend. He wants to hang out some. And he thought that when you danced, you looked all right. We're going to listen to most of the song. It's fairly short, but there isn't much change to it. It basically just sticks to the vibe that you're going to hear.
1, 2, 3, 4. I wanted to be your friend. I wanted to get to know ya. I wanted to be your friend. I wanted to get to know ya. I wanted to be your friend. Wanted to be your friend. No kidding.
So we'll stop it there. At that break, there's a little break in the song and it starts again, but it's basically the same thing. Wanted to be your friend. Next, I love this song. Next, we have Theme to Wendell Stivers, which is referring to a founding member of the band. It's a moniker, if you will. But this is an instrumental, one of only 2 instrumentals in their entire catalog of 9 albums. And it definitely has a Tex-Mex influence to it as well. It feels westerny. It feels like there's sand blowing across a dirt path, a tumbleweed, a cactus. Close your eyes, picture it. But no, I love it. I think it's part of the guitar tone that kind of gives me that vibe. But it has like a build, crescendo, then it kind of lays out a little bit and does it again. So it's a really cool song. So we'll play a snippet of it here. Just a little fade out there. That's most of it. Maybe about 30 seconds or so left, but it's cool. It's definitely got a vibe to it, and I enjoy it. Next, we have Primary, which is a very short song, 1 minute and 10 seconds.
The primary means of motivation walks on to her place on 13th Street. The primary means of motivation paints her pictures on our lover's face.
It's just a really fast punk song. Basically, I do love his vocal change. He basically repeats the lines that start the song, but then there's even more vocal fry, and it's just super high energy, and a song that you can bang your head to while you drive safely. That one it's a hot one. It's fast. It's loud. But it does manage to do a couple things. So it has that intro, and then it's kind of got a breakdown in the middle with some sound effects, typical. And then it comes back with even more ferocity. So it's a cool little song. 2 left on this LP, which we call Telephono. The next one is called The Government Darling. And we'll listen to a snippet of that.
He's read you every book that you'd ever list him. Then he'll put you back up there on your shelf. You're the government darling. You're sick to yourself. Yeah, you're sick to yourself. You're the government darling. You're sick to yourself. Yeah, you're sick to yourself. You're the government.
Alright, so we played a short snippet of that to just give you an idea of the song, and then talk about my favorite part. So there's a part towards the end where the chorus is, and the instruments drop out, and you just hear Britt's voice, and again, there's that vocal fry, that edge, energy, that is kind of the footnote to that feeling on the album. So let's hear that little track portion.
What would the powers that be do without you, Dad? We'd probably live on the so socialist. So mama, man, oh, don't you go and deny it. Just lie and spit to pursue what's for your health. You're the government darling. You're sick to yourself. And yeah, you're sick to yourself. You're the government darling. You're sick to yourself. And yeah, you're sick to yourself. You're the government darling. The government darling.
Alright, so there it is, that part that I really like where the instruments drop out. And his voice is just crazy. So much energy. The vocal fry. Love it. But yeah, that's the last time you hear the band that high energy. Because now we're to the last song on the record called Plastic Mylar. And there is some finality to this song. The melody, kind of the tempo. It's a feeling of an end of an album. And I think they do that well. The melody is poppy, so it's got a nice little hook to it. And towards the end, he name drops some people, John Clayton and some other people in Austin that were probably helpful to the band and supportive. And so that would be cool. If you're a fan, you get to hear your name mentioned in this song. I'm sure they dug that. But let's hear a snippet of this song.
Inside the wall, I wasn't sure. The way things turned out was best they could be. I'm working today.
All right, so I just wanted to start with the intro just because it is so good. I love the guitar riff that he does with the opening chords. And it does build, and then he has a little, goes a little somewhere different you might not expect instrument-wise and melody-wise. Right after the chorus, right after he says plastic mylar. I don't really know what this song is about either. I know plastic mylar could be used as like magazine covers. It also could be used to make really cheap drum heads. So I don't know which he's talking about. Could be neither. So again, as far as the song goes, he talks about the movement. He wants to be part of the movement. To me, that seems like it's a musical thing, right? Like a group of maybe the local music scene there in Austin. You know, they were part of a movement. Were they post-grunge? In the 1996. But, a musical thing that was going on. So now let's get into the B-sides for this record. We have 3. And we will start with their cover of Party Up by Prince. All right, so there is their version of Party Up by Prince. Definitely different. Obviously on the Party Up, there's like a really nice slick vocal, and all the vocals in this are super distorted. And I'm just guessing just because, who can sing like Prince? You have to come at it a different way. The beat's different. It's different. It is an interesting choice. I know Britt has always been very influenced by Prince, and I'm sure the rest of the band. But, to cover a Prince song, and you're a new band, and that's on a release, that takes guts. I would say they would actually, in their current state, in 2020, they'd be perfect to cover a Prince song. I think they got enough slick musicians in their band right now that could pull it off, and sound really, really good. They have some funk elements that they could pull off, I think. Come on now. That is the one B-side for the Not Turning Off single. Next, we're going to get into the 2 B-sides off of All the Negatives Have Been Destroyed single here. So first we will hear some Irrigation Man, again that was mentioned earlier in the episode, written by John Clayton, and I really like this song. I will play the snippet that I think best describes the song. It does have a neat, intro, and then the verse gets a little quieter, but let's play a clip of that.
Leaves you for long, it's like electric power to a song, and when it's sucked dry, the farmer's daughter helps irrigate with pops and water. Irrigation man. Irrigation man.
So a cool song. I don't know what this one is about either. Giving people drinks, maybe sodas and waters. Irrigating a person and not a field. I don't know. But it is a neat song, and I recommend you look all these up on your own to hear the full song, because I'm guessing these ones aren't familiar to a lot of people compared to the actual record. So let's get into the last one. It's called If You Say So. And like I mentioned earlier in this episode, this little intro into the verse always gets stuck in my head, and I don't know why. But here it is. right, so that is If You Say So. And I say so that you should, again, listen to all these songs. That one in particular, that's probably my favorite of the B-sides that we're talking about with Telephono. I feel like that one could have been on the album. I think it would fit in really well as a quick little rock song. But wow, that is the end of our coverage of this era. The album and the B-sides for Telephono. What else do you guys want from a band's first album? Come on now. It is interesting to know that this did not sell well. Matador liked it, but didn't do well for them. They played the songs live. They played out a lot. And they were moving on to the next thing, to the next record. So, it wasn't the happy story of a band in the 90s getting a big radio single and then, them selling a bunch of albums. But don't you think it's better that way? I mean, honestly, when we look back now, we can look back at this first record and think about how happy we are they didn't blow up like that. Because, I have bins and bins of CDs in my basement from the 90s where I bought it because I liked this one song that I heard, and the rest is not good. Spoon, as we will see as we journey through these albums, they progress, they build, and it's worth it because lots of change, lots of variety, and lots of exciting stuff coming up. So that is the end of the Telephono track by track episode here. So a couple things I do want to mention. The next one is on you. So please write into the show at iturnmypodcaston@gmail.com. Again, we're going to give it a little bit of time here to see how the responses come in. And the next episode will be your reactions to all the content here in this episode. So again, iturnmypodcaston@gmail.com. Write in, and we'll go through the responses, and we will make an episode all about fandom. And I know there are a lot of people that like this album, so I want to hear from you guys. So I'm excited to get that out to everybody. But I know what you've all been waiting for. Or maybe not, and if that's the case, I truly thank you. But as was mentioned, I have some exclusive conversations with Britt Daniel of Spoon about every release that Spoon has in their catalog. So we're going to cut to the conversation all about Telephono in this era, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Shall we get into all these magnificent releases? Let's do it. Okay, so first of all, we're going way, way back. I just recorded the Telephono episode. It's after we record this, I'm going to tack this portion on and get it out. But so I've been listening to it a lot lately. And first of all, you have the Nefarious EP, which was basically 3 songs from Telephono. You have the Godfather's cover on there. That was through Fluffer Records. Just a little thought about, do you remember making that? How was that recording? Was it like your all-time first recording session?
Yeah. Trying to remember. There was a demo that I remember we recorded at some guy named Chris's house. And then that one, the Nefarious EP, we recorded at a friend of Jim's house. I remember exactly where he lived, right on Enfield and Mopac, right by the trains. And I can't remember his name, but we probably recorded it in over 2 or 3 nights, and I think we did it on some kind of, if not ADAT, then something like that, some digital format that was cheap and popular at that time.
They
don't sound so good. We re-recorded those songs for Telephono.
Right. Yeah, because there's actually, I think all those songs, or most of them, have Drake Tungsten versions, which you released on a cassette. And then I think there's like the Nefarious EP versions, and then, yes, what ended up being the definitive, as far as fidelity goes, on Telephono.
Right.
It's interesting, though. There's a video on YouTube from the Austin History Center that has like the promo video that you recorded for Nefarious, where you're just in a house and playing that song. But so they still have it, and they also have a really cool gig that you guys did. Which, do you remember? It was it was called Soon to Be Seen. It was on Austin Television.
Yeah, I remember that one.
And you had Hunter on bass. It was his first show. Only had 2 rehearsals.
I think it was his only show.
Was it? Okay.
I think so.
Well, he was good. He didn't have. Hey Hunter, if you're listening, first of all, I'm not saying bad. I want you to come on the show, talk about it. But no, his stage presence, I would say, is a little lacking. But technically, I think his bass playing was just fine. But yeah,
he's great.
Yeah, no, it's neat that, to me, this is the only.
Well, Hunter was in a bunch. Ended up doing a lot of stuff with us. He's the guy who, when we were on tour, well, it wasn't even a tour; it was a show, and he was our tour manager for a while, and he came up with the title, "The Agony of Lafitte," just kind of out of the blue. He was also he's the main guy in the Sister Jack. He's in the nun outfit, the Sister Jack video.
Oh, really? Okay.
He plays on the Not Turning Off video, and he's also in the Underdog video. The director who throws his headphones.
Wow, that's trivia.
He's a great friend of the band, great friend of me. He's the bass player for the Wannabes and among many other bands, the Dung Beatles, and I don't know. He's a fantastic musician.
Yeah, I just wondered if he was nervous, like the first time ever playing and
probably
recording a television appearance. Holy cow! But it's super neat because it's like the only. I mean, it's a shout out to the sound guy, Chris Conley, the house sound guy of that gig, because it sounded really good. I mean, it was obviously a TV taping, but it's like the only good live set you can find of these songs. You played a lot of Telephono, obviously, and
right. Yeah, I remember when. Yeah, that was probably done around November of '96 or something, and we had been touring on Telephono all year, and we've been playing with a guy that we called Clanky on bass, and then Clanky and we parted ways with Clanky. Although I still love the dude, I see him around town a lot. His name's Scott Adair. We affectionately called him Clanky, and so yeah, we just had this one extra show, and then we asked Hunter if he would do that one. I don't think we ever played with Hunter again. I think he played keyboards with us later.
Okay.
He's worn a lot of hats in this band.
Sure. Yeah. No. He like I said, he technically. I mean, it sounded great, but it was so funny because you were just saying, oh yeah, by the way, this is his first show, and we've rehearsed twice, and yeah, he was technically proficient, to say the least.
I remember Alejandro Escovedo was at that show.
Okay, so there was somebody talking to you in the audience, and you're like, "Hey, there's our biggest fan." Was that him?
I don't think that was.
Was it somebody razzing you or what?
I don't know. I can't remember who the biggest fan was, but I had not met Alejandro at that point. I met him right after that, and he said he was at that show, and
okay,
we became buddies.
That's cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing I think press-wise about this record is that the Pixies comparison comes up. Honestly, like there's a couple little tidbits, and my actually favorite song on there is probably the most Pixies influenced song. But I feel like there's so many other influences and things you're pulling from. I mean, do you think it was a lot because you had Andy, who was a female bass player, kind of like the Kim Deal lineup?
Do I think that's why we got those comparisons so much? I don't think that helped. That we had a female bass player. but yeah, I was a massive fan of the Pixies, and I clearly I hear their influence in that record a lot. I still grab influence from them. I love the Pixies.
Yeah, and the song I was referring to is "Dismember," which I love. I still think that's I love it. That was actually on my playlist for the like greatest hits of. I was trying to do one from each album, and I love it because it's like the typical formula of the quiet verse, and then the chorus goes some dark melody somewhere out of the somewhere you weren't expecting, and then you have the female vocals saying the kind of like debaser, like you're saying the word in the song.
Oh yeah.
But I love it. But I mean, obviously you posted an ad in the Austin Chronicle for a bass player, and it's not like you were looking for female bass player Kim Deal lookalike. Like you were just looking for a bass player.
Yeah, and that's how I had started a couple bands before that. It wasn't. It was purely out of necessity because I just didn't know a lot of people in Austin. I had just moved there, relatively, and I went to the university, but I didn't meet a lot of musicians there. I would meet people and I'd say, "Hey, you want to start a band?" And they'd say, "No, I'm not a musician." That would happen over and over again. So yeah, I ended up placing for Skellington. We found the band that I was in, 2 bands before Spoon. We found a couple of guitar players in the paper, and that was just what you did.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, so your influences are what they are, especially at an earlier age, and it's
also what the Pixies did. That's how they found Kim Deal. So I wasn't doing it out of imitation.
Right. You're looking for
necessity.
And that still happens. Yeah. Craigslist, there's a
right.
You can find a weekend gig sitting in any band you want. Just go to Craigslist. Actually, the thing that I really feel a Pixies vibe is the song Drake Tungsten song, "This Is a Whipping," which you put on a Peekaboo compilation, and I feel like that line where you're like, "I swear I want you to be here, I do." Like I always hear that as super Black Francis style, but I love that song too.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah.
I really like that one. But yeah, I mean, as far as the record goes, besides those comparisons, everything else kind of just playing out the way it was. I mean, how was the transition from playing all these songs live to recording in a studio? Now, I've heard it was basically John Crosland's garage or tool shed that you recorded in.
Yeah, we recorded it very slowly at his place. It was a place he called Dogland because it was in his backyard, and there were dogs everywhere. You could hear dogs barking. We would have to wait for the dogs to stop barking to do takes.
Oh wow!
And I guess it was a garage, but it's weird because it was in the backyard.
So you couldn't get a car in there? How do you get a car in there?
I think you maybe used to be able to, but anyway, it was. He had outfitted it with tiles on the floor, and it was very small, but and he had a 1/2-inch 8-track machine, and they filled up fast. So we made an entire album by recording bass and drums, and sometimes my guitar on that 8-track, and then you mix that down to that, and start over with 2 tracks as the first 2 tracks on another 8-track tapes. So which meant we were locked in to however we had mixed the bass and drums,
Yeah. So like the Beatles, you had to bounce down your tracks. They had their 4 tracks.
You couldn't go backwards.
Yeah.
And we didn't mind,
Yeah.
That was the first time we'd made a real record. It was like, heck, it's cool. That's just the way we're doing it,
Yeah, man. That's what they did 40 years ago. So you had
later. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, that tape machine later on, John sold that tape machine to Chris Smith, Frenchie Smith from The Bubble, who's a big producer in Austin, and he loaned Jim and I that tape deck. So later we recorded on that same tape deck on a few songs that was what was to become Girls Can Tell, and
wow.
By then, the tape machine was in bad shape, and the reels were jumping off the machine, and the tape would get mangled.
But you had 8 tracks to work with, you said? You did have, it was 8?
Yes, it's still 8 tracks. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the way records were made. And I mean, yeah, all the great ones. I mean, you think about, I don't know off the top of my head. Was Sergeant Pepper's a 4-track or 8-track? I don't remember how it was
I
something
think that's
banana.
4.
Is it? Isn't that?
I think it was the first 4 tracks that they made. I think that's what that was.
And then I think on the White Album, did they finally get 8 or something? But that's bananas to think about how
Right.
how you have such a short amount of working time with it, and then you say, no, we got to move on. So you had
Mm-hmm.
you had down the tracks, just kind of from playing them live. So you said you had to wait for dogs barking. There's lots of interruptions, but you guys were pretty proficient at playing these songs by this time. Like it wasn't like you were rehearsing in the studio. You already had these rehearsed, right?
Yeah, these were songs we had played a ton in
Yeah.
bars and at clubs. Yeah.
Right.
We
Right.
gigged pretty regularly.
So that helps.
Yeah, probably more than any other record we've made. We played all those songs out and had them down,
Right. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, as I was doing that Telephono episode and re-listening with just a really critical ear, I noticed new things like you did. I mean, I forget the song now, but there's like a midway through the song, there's no more hi-hat, there's just a shaker. Oh, I think it's Nefarious. Yeah, like the second verse of Nefarious, you hear, in the left ear, there's a little shaker. You're constantly kind of doing those type of things that textually in the song that just kind of make it interesting, and that, so many other bands didn't do at that time. They're like, hey, the hi-hat, that's what we do for the whole song, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that come from? As far as, I mean, that's something that from recording one to now, you're constantly, trying to make things interesting, weird sounds coming from here, from there. You just like unexpected things. I mean, is there a certain influence you can pin down, or?
Yeah, I like to keep it interesting. I like, honestly, those percussion tricks, like the shaker and the tambourine, I think that they're more noticeable on our records because we insisted that they be super loud. And the reason I did is because that's the way that I heard them on Beatles records, So the Beatles were doing that because they would record guitar, bass, drums to one track, and then the drum level was kind of locked in. They couldn't go back. And so they would put percussion on to like boost the rhythm element way back up. But I ended up really liking that sound.
Absolutely.
And so even though we were told it was wrong, we would, for songs like probably Nefarious, and then definitely on stuff like Kill the Moonlight, the tambourine was like almost a lead instrument, just because I like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I like that vibe,
Well, even like if you see playing live, sometimes a member of the band is on tambourine that song. Like, that's what you're playing today. This song, like it's that important. And I like on the Greatest Hits record, you have the digital artwork, and I think it's on the back of the LP. The tambourine. It's something that signifies that, about the band, like there's the attention to detail, and that classic sound. And I was wondering if it was from the Beatles. I mean, I know there's obviously other bands that did that, but there's probably only one other band I'm more or as equally researched and looked at every interview and every anthology recording, and that's the Beatles. So I wasn't sure. I didn't want to project that onto you, but yeah, I guess I have another. I don't want to project this either, but I feel like your time working in you'd had a job as a video game sound designer. Did you think that had anything to do with like the way you use sound in your music? Like, do you think that had any influence on you at all? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are. I still had that job while we were making Telephono, and some of the sounds that I would end up working on for these space video games would end up being, say the introduction to Don't Buy the Realistic.
Yeah.
Some of those same source sounds. Or I think there's a version of Nefarious where the same kind of thing, where there's just like the sound effects that I had been working on at work, and then I manipulated them, turned them around, and used them on the record.
Yeah.
It couldn't have hurt.
Yeah, I always thought, like, I wonder that type of work when he was really thinking about, how sounds integrate with music, because if you're working on the one portion of the sounds, you integrate that later with the music and the game, or whatever you're working on, and how they play off of each other. I've always found that really cool. Sorry to get off on that tangent.
That's okay.
So because we were talking about, we got through the recording process during Telephono. Then I have just a couple questions about specifically on things on that record. So in the last track, Plastic Mylar, you talk about a movement. Was that just like talking about the Austin scene at the time? Like, I know you name drop John Clayton, who did some covers of songs on a couple records. I forget everyone else who you were talking about. But was that just kind of like what was going on at Austin at the time? Is that what you're referring to?
The movement was almost I realized that I thought that it was sort of a joke sentiment, but also one that I fully believed in. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It just kind of meant, are you part of the movement? Mm-hmm. It seemed like a ridiculous question, but also, but I felt it.
Yeah, no,
I don't know if I'm explaining that right.
No, yeah, okay, so that it's kind of what I was going. It
was a movement, as in like almost like a unspoken quasi-political movement. Is just sort of what I had in mind. Uh-huh. Are you part of the movement? Like, it was kind of like this hipster lingo kind of thing that I was making fun of, but also I did want to be part of that kind of movement,
Yeah, well, go ahead. Sorry.
And then just all the names were just kind of like, that just seemed like a cool, here's a way to fill in some lyrics, just name some people that I can mention.
Yeah, I'm sure they all thought that was cool, for sure.
Yeah.
Just because at that time, you had, like, I know you were inspired by, at least, maybe not, if it's not Nirvana, Kurt Cobain. You wrote, there's that Drake Tungsten song. But yeah, as part of that, grunge, then the reaction to like the post-grunge movement. There was other, bands like the New Radicals, like, right, they're like, no, we're radical dudes. We're fighting against this movement, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But yeah, I feel like, the reaction to grunge, I didn't know if that had anything with it, but it's more so like what was going on with you and your area, your music scene, your movement, and you wanted to be part of it too.
I kind of just, I don't know. I was making fun of it while at the same time saying I understand the appeal of this. Yeah.
That's cool. So who's Wendell Stivers? I want to just hear what you have to say about Wendell Stivers.
I love this. He called it Wendell Stivers, and that's Greg Wilson, who was our first guitar player. He was also in Sincola, and I wanted him to be in the band because I thought that he was the guy who seemed to get lead guitar more than anybody else I had known in Austin. He seemed to get it, that it was just little riffs and a little bit of dissonance. Very, very much a Joy Santiago type of player. And
yeah.
So even though he was in another band, I said, "Come on, you gotta come be in this band with me." And it was tempting fate, because his band Sincola was starting to get really big, and eventually he did quit the band, quit Spoon, because he needed to do Sincola for full time. But we had him for, I don't know, maybe a year, doing shows, and he wrote some of the guitar parts that ended up being on Telephono.
Okay, so I'm guessing then, did he have to do with that instrumental on the record?
Theme to Wendell Stivers?
Yeah, or no? Was that like inspired by his playing or something? Or
I'd have to ask him. I can't remember if if he was there when he definitely wasn't there when we were recording it, but he might have been there when we played that one originally.
Yeah, I love that song. I think that song and Civantes give me like the Tex-Mex vibe, like where you're coming from, like that guitar tone, and I just picture like a Texas desert. In the best way possible. I love it.
Yeah. It's got that reverb, right?
Yeah,
that reverb guitar.
exactly. Yeah.
To me, it was a part Tex-Mex, part Will Sargent from Echo and the Bunnymen. That was the sound.
Yeah. I think that's really neat. I mean, you've only done one other instrumental on Girls Could Tell, but was that I know on that live show, that's how you open your show. You open with that instrumental, which is cool because it has like a little crescendo, and then it kind of starts to build up again. I think for an instrumental, it's actually interesting. So I mean that you've at least, some instrumentals are just kind of boring. So I like it. We'll get into guitars more specifically later towards the end, just because I love guitar. But I've always wondered, why did you use an acoustic electric guitar playing these style of music?
Well, I used the acoustic guitar initially because I had two guitars. The other one was a Les Paul imitation that sounded terrible and looked ridiculous. and I figured out that with a solid state amp like the one I had, the acoustic wouldn't feed back uncontrollably, even in venues where I'm playing loud and with distortion on it. And I think it happened. If it had happened that it was a tube amp that I had, that it wouldn't have worked. But somehow I accidentally stumbled on this combination of using this acoustic and whatever kind of pickups it had in there, and this solid state amp. It just had this cool, like, very. It was a nice clean distortion, right? I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, no, it's like a. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was a good sound, and the other thing that kept me at it was that whenever we get off stage, someone would inevitably ask me, how do you get that sound out of an acoustic guitar, right? And so I thought, well, I must be onto something here.
Well, that's the thing. When you plug an acoustic electric guitar into an electric guitar amp, it does not sound like an acoustic guitar at all. Like I learned this. I learned this when I was playing last minute I played at like an anniversary party for all these older people, like a 25th anniversary party. And I was like a teenager in my band, and I'm like, oh, acoustic guitar, I should get that. It will sound a little bit more, their vibe. And I plugged it into my Randall solid state half stack, and it did not sound good. It did not sound like an acoustic guitar. But I think if you use it right, like you can get, like you're saying, you didn't get feedback, which is interesting but you can get really good, like natural feedback if you like position it right, at your amp.
Not saying you couldn't get feedback, but for some reason this one, it seemed pretty controlled.
Yeah, you could use it when you wanted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
You could step on a booster pedal and then you could go wild. My mom gave me this out of the blue. She got me I told her I wanted a distortion pedal. She got a thing called the Metal Zone.
Oh yeah, Boss Metal Zone, for sure. I had that. Black
which
and
was
orange.
Like so uncool. Yes, black and orange, and it was so uncool, and I hated metal at that time, and I did, but for some reason that was the pedal I used for a while. And
that's amazing.
Definitely used it with that combo of the acoustic guitar.
Okay, well I'll edit it out if you don't want people to know you use the uncool Boss Metal Zone.
No, that's fine.
I'm just kidding. Okay, so last question on that guitar then. Did you record Telephono with that guitar? That's because when I hear it live, it sounded exactly like the record, that TV taping, and that's what it's really cool. Like there's no drop off, and you have to dial in your live sound. Like it sounded exactly like the record. So that was neat.
That was the only guitar I would use unless I broke a string, and then I think I had a backup Telecaster that my dad gave me. But yeah, I would just use that guitar for years and years, and I think probably used it even after a series of sneaks came out. I think I was still using.
Yeah,
I was
I
going with
remember.
that.
I remember you seeing a show of you playing utilitarian with that guitar. So
Yeah.
definitely.
All right, kids, so we got to cut it there. I just have to. As a responsible content creator, I can't give you all that content right now. You got to stick around. That's the whole point of this. So, again, I'm excited to hear your reactions to my opinions on Telephono, or the interview that you just heard, or anything else that's related to Spoon. Please follow, like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. We are on iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. And please remember the email address. I turn my podcast on. All one word, all lowercase, no weird symbols. I turn my podcast on at gmail.com. And that is how we can stay in touch. So until the next episode, just want to say thank you again. We will talk Spoon for as long as we both shall live. And bye-bye, bye-bye.
Ba